Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second colloquium for this semester. I'm happy to introduce our speaker today. He is our newest addition at the department. Dr. Eihab Abu Rabiah completed his PhD at the Ben-Gurion University of Negev in Israel in July of this year, with the dissertation on acquisition of Hebrew lexicon among Negev Bedouin high school students, an empirical account. He's currently a Fulbright and Rothschild Fellow and a visiting postdoctoral scholar at the University of Utah, working with Professor Jarvis on lexical diversity in highly inflected languages. Previously, he worked as a Hebrew teacher at AHD High School in Israel, then as an instructor and a lecturer of Hebrew at Ben-Gurion University and K College. He also worked as a Hebrew language proficiency test developer at the research and assessment department of a high-tech startup. His research areas include second language acquisition and vocabulary assessment. Most of his publications deal with Hebrew lexical diversity and lexical density, and he has presented in several national and international conferences. Dr. Abu Rabiah has won multiple awards and certificates, some of which are the Mahar Award for an outstanding article by a research student, many outstanding achievement certificates, and summa cum laude, among others. He is also included in the Dean's List for academic excellence. Everyone, please welcome my dear lab mate and colleague, Dr. Abu Rabiah.
Thank you, Ariana, so much for the invitation. And thank you, Scott, for the invitation to present my research in this forum. So what will this lecture include? I will start with a background on second language acquisition, vocabulary assessment, and Hebrew as L2 in Israel. Then I will present the importance of this research and explain the lexical measures that have been tested. Furthermore, I'll discuss the limitations of applying these indices to the Hebrew language. After that, I'll present my research questions, methodology, and findings. Finally, I'll present the research limitations and explore future implications and new research directions. As you already know, most people acquire a second language, L2, at some point in their lives. Second language acquisition, SLA, is the field dedicated to understanding the process of L2 acquisition in both naturalistic and instructed context. Within SLA, my focus is on the acquisition of vocabulary, lexicon, one of the most important aspects of this process. In general, vocabulary is defined as all the words used by a particular person or all the words that exist in particular language or subject. Words are the building blocks of language from which larger structures are created, such as sentences, paragraphs, and texts. Without them, there's no language. Vocabulary knowledge makes a great contribution to the 4 language skills: reading, writing, speaking, and listening, and also can predict them. It's central to communicative competence and either leads to successful communication or can prevent it. Furthermore, the acquisition of vocabulary plays an important role in the formation of complete spoken and written texts. This knowledge of vocabulary is used as an indicator of academic skill and academic success. Since a lack of vocabulary knowledge is an obstacle to learning, learners see vocabulary acquisition as the main task in L2 acquisition and devote most of their time to expanding it. On the screen, you can see two, in my opinion, great books that provide a general overview of the field of vocabulary assessment. This presentation focuses on assessing the active vocabulary of written Hebrew used by Arabic-speaking high school students in southern Israel. So if we wish to talk about the acquisition of Hebrew amongst Arabic speakers in Israel, we must first strive to understand the demographic background and the layout of languages in this population. The Arab citizens of Israel, who constitute roughly 21% of Israel's population, are in constant contact with Hebrew, the language of the Jewish majority. Currently, Israel has two parallel education systems, one that is conducted in Hebrew and another which serves the non-Jewish population using Arabic, with Hebrew taught as a mandatory second language. Within the Arab community, at primary school, standard Arabic is taught first, and Hebrew is officially introduced in the second grade. It's taught approximately 3 to 5 hours per week throughout each school year, culminating in a final exam in Hebrew as L2. In high school, Hebrew classes are officially instructed in Hebrew, but in practice, classes tend to lapse into spoken Arabic, the L1 of almost all the teachers. Outside school, Hebrew is likewise very much present. Educated adults are functionally bilingual in varying degrees, according to their level of education and writing situation. Since most adults code switch intensively in their in-group discourse and read Hebrew newspapers, young children are exposed to Hebrew at home to a certain extent. A common feature in the previous studies on Hebrew as L2 for Arabs in Israel involved classifying errors in written language according to the different linguistic fields, vocabulary, syntax, phonology, etc., and testing cross-linguistic influence and transfer. Only in very few studies was vocabulary the focus. These studies examined semantic borrowing and loan translation. None of them used quantitative lexical indices to assess the vocabulary of this population, nor reported frequencies of the phenomenon being tested, and no changes over time were examined. Therefore, this study aims to fill this gap. Being a Hebrew as L2 learner and later becoming a teacher and a researcher of Hebrew myself gives me a great motivation to understand the acquisition and assessment of this language in particular and languages in general. In order to assess the vocabulary size of a learner, a number of quantitative lexical measures have been devised and have been used for over 100 years. In this lecture, I will discuss two of them, lexical density and lexical diversity. I will start with lexical density. Lexical density is based on the distinction between content words and function words. The main distinction is that content words provide the main semantic content of the sentence, while function words connect content words together. There is, however, no complete agreement between researchers on the components of the two categories. For many, the content words group includes nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. The other parts of speech, including prepositions, conjunctions, quantifiers, pronouns, numbers, and determiners, are included in the function words group. Lexical density is the density with which the information is presented and calculated as the percentage of content words out of all words featured in spoken or written texts. For example, in the sentence, the door and the window are closed, there are 3 content words, door, window, and closed, out of 7 words. Therefore, the lexical density is 42%. Lexical density quantifies the knowledge and ideas in a text. A denser text with a high percentage of content words contain more information than a text with a relatively high percentage of function words. Since content words convey the bulk of semantic content of a text, Their use is an important indicator of textual richness and information packaging. This measure is thus used to compare the linguistic development of speakers and writers in both L1 and L2. Specifically, the development of the academic language of L1 and L2 writers can be measured. The second measure examined in this study is lexical diversity. Lexical diversity is the range and variety of vocabulary deployed in a text by either a speaker or a writer. According to McCarthy and Jarvis, 27, page 459. It's indicated by the number of written words in a sample of speech or writing of a set length and how far repetition is avoided. The greater the range, the higher the lexical diversity. This is the most common measure in vocabulary testing. This is probably why it's also called lexical richness by some researchers, whereas by others, lexical richness is used as a general concept for different lexical measures, such as lexical diversity, lexical density, lexical sophistication, lexical originality, and more. This measure is also known as lexical range, lexical variability, lexical variation, and lexical variety. A speaker displaying high lexical diversity is judged positively, as he is able to convey complex messages. High lexical diversity indicates that the speaker or writer has a rich vocabulary and large repertoire, so he does not need to repeat the same types again and again. Lexical diversity is found to be an indicator of the learner's linguistics competence and also of the stage in language acquisition. It also predicts the writing quality. This capacity is therefore an important measure of linguistic and communicative ability. One of the simplest indices of lexical diversity is type token ratio, TTR, which is calculated as the number of unique words or types in a text divided by the total number of tokens, of words, tokens in the text. Namely, tokens are all the words in a sample, including repetitions, while each distinct or different word is a type. For example, in the previous example, the door and the window are closed. There are 7 tokens and 6 types, since the word "and" appears twice. So if the lexical diversity is the lexical diversity in this sentence is 85%. Lexical diversity therefore increases as the number of type increases, or as the number of repetitions decreases. The main issue of TTR is that it is affected by the length of the text. As the text becomes longer, the lexical diversity decreases. This is because as text becomes longer, there will be a linear and constant increase in the number of tokens, since by definition, every additional word equals a new token, while the increase in types becomes slower as the length increases. An explanation for this negative correlation is that our types are limited, while our tokens are not. We have a limited number of words types available on a given subject, but can write or say infinitive words tokens on the same subject. In addition, there is no text that includes more than a handful of words that can be meaningful without repetitions. Many researchers had proposed new indices to solve this issue, including Johnson, 1939, Carroll, 1964, McKee and colleagues, 2000, McCarthy and Jarvis, 27, Vidal and Jarvis, 2020. It's also recommended to analyze the same number of words in every essay. Before revealing which calculation methods I use to test these measures, we should discuss what challenges are faced when applying these indices in general in any language, and specifically in Hebrew. The definition of lexical density as the percentage of lexical words out of all words in a text, and the definition of lexical diversity as the number of unique words in a text divided by the total number of words raises an initial consideration of what counts as a word. Halliday, 1985, preferred to refer to items rather than words. His doctrine sought to address situations where two or more orthographic words are needed to express one meaning or one idea. For example, in expressions and verbal phrases such as switch off. This is correct in many languages, including English and Hebrew. English, like some other languages, is relatively amenable to automatic analysis of lexical density and lexical diversity of written corpora. Since, broadly speaking, each word is orthographically distinct, Hebrew in construct is a synthetic language with orthographic properties that make automatic analysis difficult. A primary difficulty is that several lexical or functional items can be combined in one orthographic word. For example, the orthographic Hebrew word shebakfar, which means which is in his village, which is in his village, contains 3 function words and 1 content word. A second difficulty is that in Hebrew, several types can be combined in the same orthographic word. For instance, in the previous example, one orthographic word includes 4 types, which is in his village. The third difficulty is the fact that written modern Hebrew is mainly non-vowelized. Therefore, 25% of the words in Hebrew are ambiguous if written separately. Only context disambiguates many words in any written text. For example, the orthographic word samich beiresh has 4 definitions: 2 nouns, a book, a barber, and 2 verbs, to count and to tell a story. So far, all analysis of lexical density in Hebrew as L1 and the vast majority in English have counted only orthographic units as an automated analysis was used. So an orthographic unit that included function word and a content word or 2 function words was counted as 1 item only. We shall call this method the conventional approach of lexical density. In contrast, in the adapted approach of lexical density that I suggest, each item is counted separately, even if orthographically incorporated in another orthographic word. This is especially important. This is especially important because words have an important role in the function in the text. The function words have an important role in the text. They carry grammatical information about the content words. This role is reflected in them, whether they are written separately or attached to other words following them. In the conventional approach, the same function word that may appear in 2 different ways is counted differently. This language difference has no semantics justification, because if 2 words play the same role, whether semantic or grammatical, then why count them in one case and not in the another? In the adapted approach, the same function word is counted both when it is separated and when it is attached to other words. In regard to lexical diversity, the previous research in Hebrew as L1 counts just one type in a single orthographic word, as is the case in English. In both languages, in most cases, types that consist of more than one orthographic word were not included. In my proposed approach, all the different types included in one orthographic word were counted. This is essential because types of function words are the most frequent types in language. And in Hebrew, many of them are written attached to other types in a single orthographic word. Therefore, in my research, the adaptation to the Hebrew properties also counts all different types in the orthographic unit. This measure was tested not only throughout the TTR formula, but also throughout the corrective type token ratio, CTTR, Herden's index, and Uber index. All of them were tested in the same length. The main difference between measuring lexical density and lexical diversity is that the density was based on the word form or the word token. In contrast, the diversity was based on the word types or lemmas. Lemmas are made up of a head word and its inflections, all of which have the same part of speech. Most other research on lexical diversity does not indicate which lexical units were used. But following Travers Daller and colleagues 2018, Jarvis and Hashimoto 2021, and others, I indicate that I use lemmas. Let's summarize the differences between the two approaches tested. The conventional approaches count one function, content, or word type in any orthographic word, whereas the adapted approaches count all the function, content, or word types in any orthographic word, or that consist of more than one orthographic word. My research questions are: one, how will the adapted approaches affect the results of tested lexical measures? That is the adaptation to linguistic features of Hebrew essential? Two, are there changes in the indices results with the increase in the acquisition time of Hebrew as a second language to Arabic? The 23 participants, 9 male and 13 female, were all native speakers of native Arabic. They all studies in the same advanced level science track class at a public high school in northern Negev of Israel. They all started instruction at the same age and have received the same amount of formal exposure to Hebrew. The procedure, repeated twice, one in 11th grade and again in 12th grade, was as follows. The participants watched an animated video called Bridge. The video, which features no spoken dialogue, shows two situations of two animals approaching each other from separate sides of a narrow bridge as they try to cross it. In the first situation, they are not willing to negotiate a compromise, so they both fall over the bridge. In the second, they do negotiate and therefore succeeded in crossing. The video was given to help the students start the complex process of writing without, however, providing any linguistic help. It lasted less than 3 minutes, during which no discussion was conducted. Afterward, the students were asked to write an argumentative essay dealing with the question, are you willing to negotiate and reach a compromise in order to promote a common goal? The task was performed under supervision, with the teacher ensuring that no one received any help. All students completed their writing in less than 90 minutes. The essays were not returned to the writers and no feedback was given. In the final stage of this process, we collected a corpus of 46 essays of approximately 7,000 running words. Unfortunately, no automatic analysis software in Hebrew allows for an accurate analysis of lexical density and lexical diversity as I proposed. Thus, I used one of the digital tools developed in the digital humanities field. The software is called CATNA, which stands for Computer Assisted Text Markup and Analysis. It's a free web-based application for manual and automated text analysis and annotation. The analysis excluded non-Hebrew words written either in Arabic script or rarely in English. I follow the RIVA 2019 in excluding any lexicon external to the language studied. The proper names of people, countries, companies, and more were also excluding following, for example, Milton 29. In regard to lexical diversity, sorry, about that. Yeah, this is in regard to the methodology. And now I will move to the results, the finding. So what did I find? Let's start with the lexical density. This table summarizes the results of the two approaches at the two time points. As one would expect, based on the different ways in which they are calculated, at both time points, the results of the two approaches are highly significantly different. In many studies in Hebrew, like English, it has been found that the most common words in the text are function words. In Hebrew, attached function words are as common as separated function words. Therefore, it is appropriate to deal with them, with both groups similarly. The adapted approach of lexical density ensures the counting of the most common words group in Hebrew texts. Since this approach is given a more representative place for the function words, the lexical density level in it is lower than the conventional approach, as can be seen in this graph. It has been found in previous studies on English that lexical density over 50% is usually produced in writing by native learners and not L2 learners. According to this, the adapted approach indicates values more similar to findings in English than the conventional approach. That is, the use of the adapted approach allows for cross-linguistic comparison, unlike the conventional approach, which limits the comparison to one language only. In regard to the acquisition time length effect, the mean of the values for the adapted approach at the two time points are 40% and 40 and 41 respectively, showing a slight increase between time periods. It is interesting to note, however, that the mean of the conventional approach values at both time points is 52%, with no increase whatsoever. The differences are not statistically significant, with a small size effect. While we generally might expect an increase in lexical density over time, studies often show it is to be stable. Therefore, this result is not particularly surprising, nor it necessarily evidence that the students did not improve their lexical competence. It should be noted that the lack of increase in lexical density over time can be attributed to a sharp decrease in only 3 students' essays. These 3 experienced a relatively dramatic decrease against our expectations of vocabulary development. According to paired sample t-test, if these essays were not included in the analysis, there would be a statistically significant increase in the lexical density level of the rest of the class between the 2 time points. But if we examine the data from a different perspective, we may discover interesting findings. An important feature of lexical density is the ability to distinguish between different language styles, specifically between spoken language and written language. According to Ur, 1971, the average lexical density in oral text is less than 40% and ranges from 24 to 43. While in written text, the average lexical density is higher than 40% and ranges from 36 and 57. As can be seen in this figure, almost all the essays fall within the range at both time points, according to the adopted approach. However, it is notable that while at the beginning of the year, 4 out of the 23 essays are below 36%. By the second time point, only a single student falls below the range. In other words, over time, more of the class falls within the range of lexical density that has been claimed to be typical of written language. This figure shows the general progress of the whole class in terms of lexical density that we cannot see if we examine each student individually. If we examine the results of the lexical density according to the conventional approach at the 2 time points, we see that 6 essays indicate values that higher than 67%, whereas 0 essays according to the adopted approach. The tendency is clear. Written Hebrew essays tested according to the conventional approach indicate very high levels of lexical density, higher than average lexical text in L1. The fact that these texts were written by L2 learners who have not reached an advanced level of proficiency weaknesses the validity of this approach, since very high values are expected of L2 speakers with a high level of competence, as well as of native speakers. Now, let's move to the results of lexical diversity. According to paired sample t-test, the difference between the results of the 2 approaches of calculating lexical diversity according to the 4 indices, TTR, Herder's index, CTTR, and Uber index, is a very statistically significant. On this table, you can see just TTRs and a corrected TTR, but the results of Herder's index and Uber index are the same. This findings is expected because in the adopted approach, attached function types are counted, whereas in the conventional approach, they are not. Although the number of these types is small in any language, their frequency is very high, not only in English, but also in Hebrew and many other languages. Of course, frequency is a fundamental issue in examining lexical diversity. Therefore, counting them allows for a more accurate examination of the diversity of learners' vocabulary. In regard to the acquisition time length effect, in both approaches of calculating lexical diversity, 2 indices, TTR and Herder's index, do not indicate any progress in lexical diversity even after a year of learning Hebrew as L2 to Arabic speakers. Whereas the other 2 indices, CTTR and Uber index, indicate a small and slow increase that is not statistically significant. It's worth mentioning that in all indices, there was a decrease in the range. At time point 2, the averages became more concentrated, meaning in the 12th grade, the lexical diversity averages are similar to each other, more than in the 11th grade. Similar findings have been reported in various studies, including Laufer 1991. The lack of significant increase has 2 possible explanations. The first one is that an essential part of the acquisition of words in a language occurs during the initial stages of learning. Therefore, at fundamental levels, a gap of 1 year is not enough to assess a change in the lexicon, while a more extended period is needed at advanced levels. It has been found that lexicon development patterns are not always prominent if one does not look at long-term development. Second, in some studies, older students use their writing within a limited but very familiar vocabulary, or playing it safe, which lowers their lexical diversity in their writing. Although the general results show no significant increase in lexical diversity of all students, a more focused examination of the data reveals an important findings. There is a statistically significant increase in lexical diversity in the essays of the 5 students with the lowest levels of lexical diversity in the 11th grade. These students significantly improved their lexical diversity throughout the year. Apparently, they tried harder than the rest of the class to enrich their vocabulary. They realized that their vocabulary was scant compared to other students from the teacher's feedback on essays they were required to writing during the year. The same finding of individual progress was documented in previous studies, as in Laufer 1991. Regression toward the mean, the common phenomenon in statistical measurements, can also explain this increase. This is because when we testing the same index, lexical diversity in this case, of the same population at different time intervals, there is a probability that the students with high levels of lexical diversity at the first time point will lower their lexical diversity level at the second time point. In contrast, the students with the low levels of lexical diversity at the first time point will have higher levels of lexical diversity at the second time point. It is a regression of the 2 extremes toward the mean. A third explanation for this increase is that there is a broader possibility of improvement in a measure, skill, or ability at a low performance level than in a high performance level. That is, students with a low level of lexical diversity have a greater scope for enriching their lexical diversity. In contrast, this possibility is more limited for those with a high level of lexical diversity already. To sum everything up, an examination of Hebrew vocabulary according to the 2 approaches, one that is similar to English and another which is adapted to the Hebrew linguistic features, found statistically significant differences between them. The conventional approach shows very high values that are mainly expected in the written language of skilled native speakers, while the adapted approach shows lower values that are more typical of second language learners. Moreover, the adapted approach even allows for the comparison of research between Hebrew and other languages, and does not limit the comparison to studies conducted in the Hebrew language only. Although testing the vocabulary development over 1 year of learning Hebrew as L2 to Arabic reveals no significant increase of lexical density and lexical diversity, various patterns of lexical development have been observed. First, the students with the lowest level of lexical diversity at the first time point significantly improved their lexical diversity at time point 2. Second, more students' essays fall within the lexical density range of a typical written language at the second time point. Of course, the limitation. Moving to the limitations, the main limitation of this study was the relatively small number of participants. This is because it was a longitudinal study, and all students who did not complete the tasks at both time points were excluded. The major two implications are, first, before any test of a lexical index or a linguistic phenomenon in a new language, the principles on which it is based must be understood and adapted accordingly to the language being tested. By doing this, there is a greater chance of comparing different languages since we are adequately testing the same index or phenomenon. It is not the case that if the technical implementation is similar between the languages, it's more accurate and better reflects the principles of the index. Second, evaluating the research population's vocabulary can help their teachers and test writers effectively choose the appropriate materials, especially the texts used in classes and in exams. These texts are expected to contain higher lexical density and lexical diversity than is found in the students' essays. This is because the passive vocabulary, word recognition when hearing or reading, is generally greater than the active vocabulary, spontaneous use of words in speech or writing. This study leads to several future directions. First, a comparison between different lexical units, word forms, lemmas, and word families to assess vocabulary development in heavily inflected languages like Hebrew in relation to analytical languages. Second, distinguishing between proficiency levels based on the lexical units in such heavily inflected languages. Third, making a comparison between different lexical measures in order to distinguish between proficiency levels. Finally, I would like to sincerely thank my PhD supervisors under whose guidance this research was conducted, Professor Ronnie Hinken and Dr. Roy Gafter, as well as the Israeli Ministry of Innovation, Science and Technology and the Kreitman School of Advanced Graduate Studies at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev for funding this research. I'm delighted to take it in new directions with Professor Scott. So my thanks also go to Professor Scott and the Department of Linguistics at the University of Utah for hosting me this year. Thank you very much for listening. These are my references, and I will be happy to answer any of your questions.
For the Q&A session, as usual, please raise your hand if you have a question. And if you can just repeat the question for the respondent, that would be great. People online, please type your questions in the chat and we will read them out loud for you. Thank you.
I don't know exactly how Hebrew works, but I understand from the explanation of the previous conversations that a lot of Hebrew words are made up of what English would be separate. Yeah. Are there individual words in, let's say, a compound, are they inflected as well? So, for example, I don't know how to say this today, but if you have a Hebrew word that's actually made, or orthographic form that's made up of, let's say, 3 or 4 different words, are those individual words inflected, or is it the whole compound itself? It's the whole compound. And there's like a word that can be written like in different orthographic types. So the same word can be written different, orthographically different, but when we combine them, the meaning is different. One thing I'll say is, in comparing the conventional approaches to adaptive approach, is one of those more likely to measure grammatical competence in addition to lexical knowledge? Yeah, absolutely, because there's many types or many function or token function or content words that can be combined in one orthographic word. So if we use the adapted approach, we can measure like a grammatical competence in the same measure, I suppose. Yeah.
Actually, what I'm getting at is I'm wondering if the conventional approach is partly making the grammatical competence. Grammatical competence is partly a matter of knowing how to combine.
Yeah, absolutely. We can tell like if students have a high level of competence, if they can combine more types or more function or content words in the same orthographic word. Like instead of saying like my parents in two words, they can say it in one word. And this is like a high level of proficiency. Thank you.
Hi. I have a clarification question. I would like to read to that. And then if you understood that properly, then I have enough. The clarification question is, so in your approach, your metric is counting the function words. And so what in the types in the token, you have the function words.
Yeah, there's like two different function words. In the conventional approach, they count just the function words that are written separately.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, so you are using a morphological cluster of the composition, you're getting the different forms.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So then my actual question, and you have to forgive me, this is a very strong way to think about what language and corpus parts that I'm used to.
Yeah.
So it might be trivial, but I find it really weird because, as you said, function words are like languages on a different distribution. So function words are not just more frequent, but just so highly more frequent that they just usually hide the semantic content of the word. And so usually in other area of linguistics, those are just cut out if we are interested in the frequency of content words, because they are so much frequent that they are just going to skew up your distribution. In fact, I'm not particularly surprised that you use statistical significance. I would have predicted that. And so, so I'm wondering why, so it's not just about you, but it's that standard in the field that you instead count the function words. I'm guessing my question is why, since you're interested in semantics in the narrative. And what you were just mentioning to stop, I think that makes your metric confounded, because it's true that we could learn something from how much used function words are to make some measure of maybe syntactic complexity.
Yeah.
But in a single metric, it's not going to be able to do the tangle. So I wonder if you can elaborate on that. I'm probably mixing something trivial.
Yeah, I think you come from the computational linguistics, yeah?
Yeah.
Because of that. Yeah, also my supervisor knows a lot about this field. But in lexical density, we check the relation or the proportion of content words out of all words. So if we have more content words compared to the function words, there's more information in the text, provided in the text. So we must count them in order to see the relation. What are the proportions of each group? And because they are very essential, the function words, they are very essential in providing the meaning of some sentences, because they are part of the style also of the language. So we must count them.
But then I'm confused, because instead it seems that the point of your metric was to distinguish between repetitions and novel uses of the words. But that's not retrievable from that measure.
Yeah, there are two different measures.
Okay, so
Yeah.
the second measure is also
Yeah,
the function
yeah,
word.
yeah.
Okay.
The second measure is based on the relation between function words and content words. And they are very important at the measure of lexical density. But they are also important because in the lexical density, they are also important in lexical density because we measure the repetitions. And we can tell how many times the user or the speaker uses them.
But in the measure of the repetition, we still have both content word and function word?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we basically call them like word types and tokens.
Yeah.
But they are like two different perspectives to look at the same words of the language.
you remember that your Lexical diversity measures here with PTR and CTR?
Yeah, Herden's index and Dover index.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, you know this already, of course, but all of those are kind of sensitive to the text stuff.
Yeah.
They tend to show lower values among the in your calculations, did you use a standard?
Yeah, 80. Yeah, yeah. I think said it over here. Yeah, I used like the first 80 tokens of every essay.
There are some questions online. This one is by Joanne. You can mute yourself. Thank you. So Joanne says, thank you for sharing your research. Now that you have done this study with 23 participants, do you hope to do this again with a larger sample study? Is it challenging to find L2 Hebrew learner groups? If you were to do this again, would you try to recruit from the same population, or would you choose another group of L2 Hebrew learners?
Requires, I think
Sure.
I can solve that question. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we will be using, like in my postdoctoral research, a larger corpus, like 150 participants instead of 23, and all of them will be like in one time point. That I answered the question. Yeah, I have like now other plans, but I'm not sure that we will get different results if we test other languages, because we test the same phenomena. And I think that I showed on my adapted approach that we can find similar findings if we use if we adapt the lexical measures to the language which we test. So I don't think there will be a difference if we do it in other languages.
We have a clarification question from Calvin. Basically, would you expect to find the same effect with Arabic, Spanish, or something similar?
Find the same results.
The same effect with Arabic, Spanish.
I think with Arabic, because it's very similar to Hebrew, they are both Semitic languages, we can expect same findings, effects. But in Spanish, we might find a similar results if we just make sure when we adapt these measures that we understand the principles of these measures. Yeah.
Another question, would Spanish branches, etc., show similar results to Arabic, Hebrew, because of how similar those languages are, but in less similar languages, there might be difference?
Yeah, I think it might be, but in general, what I've tried to show in this lecture that if we understand the basic principles of each index and apply them to different languages, we might expect like the same results if we test the same population, like population with similar features.
Thank you for
Yeah.
a question by Evie. Thank you for sharing your research. Regarding the annotations, did you use annotated lexical data
which is already available, or did you annotate the Hebrew lexical data in one data?
Yeah, I annotated my own data. And annotated my own data. It's available, I think. Can share it with you. It's manual annotation, so.
I really like the longitudinal nature of your study, and I'm also very interested in the finding regarding 5 students' progress in lexical development. I was wondering, is there might be a potential influence of learning or exposure outside of the classroom on the 5 students' progress in lexical diversity over the course of the 1 week?
Yeah, I think we didn't do a background questionnaire, so to see what in which extent they are exposed to Hebrew, but all the participants come from a school that is near a Jewish city, so most of them are exposed to Hebrew in a certain amount, in the same amount. So I don't think that they have more, but we didn't check that. We didn't just